What's up, everyone, and welcome to the episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. I am your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter, NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content, the website, where you can find everything, dsmsports.net, and of course, the podcast is available on whichever podcast platform is your favorite. Really awesome show for you guys today. I enjoyed this episode so much. I've been getting to know our guest today for a while, and he's taught me a lot about personalization, about using data, about different fan segments and how to cater to them, about how AI is used to really generate tons of different variations of content, different packaging, different formats. My guest on the podcast today is Brian Hough. He is the co-founder and CEO of PressBox. You'll learn a little bit about what PressBox does. Brian and his co-founder bring so much knowledge from their experience. Brian spent many years at Bleacher Report. He is just doing really cool stuff with PressBox and learning a lot about it. And he's going to teach us about the technology they use and what we can learn from it as well. So whether you are looking to learn more about how generative AI can work in sports, or more about how we can start to use all the information, all the content across the internet and across social media to create bespoke content for fan bases one-on-one, if you really want to. Just really interesting stuff for you guys today. So here he is, Brian Hough of PressBox. I am back on the podcast with today's guest. I'm so excited to be having him on. I feel like I've been part of this journey and things are going great. My guest on the podcast today is Brian Hough. He is the co-founder and CEO of PressBox. Welcome to the podcast today, Brian.
Thanks, Neil. I feel like we've done this podcast 2 or 3 times already. Now we're just finally recording it. Like, we've talked a few times. We just did like a 15-minute episode before we even got started. So take 4, I guess.
Oh, it just means it's going to be that much better. I think as everyone listens to this or watches this podcast today, they're going to come away excited and just really just overstimulated by the opportunities that you guys are sitting on, the technology you're building that this industry needs, that is really evolving quickly. I'm so excited to dive into it. But first, before we get into the meat of our discussion, tell us about you. Tell us about your career path, your stops along the way, and what led you to launch PressBox.
Yeah, I've had a weird career. So I sold cars for a really long time. I spent like 10 years in sales before I got into tech. I was, people would describe me as smart, but not necessarily motivated. I think now I'd probably get diagnosed with ADHD or something. And so I went to a technical high school. I went to college. It took me longer than normal to graduate. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I'd go for a quarter and then I'd sell a bunch of used cars so I could pay my tuition. And just kept doing that. I graduated from Ohio State. I had no idea what to do with my life. So I took the LSAT and I went to law school. Literally 2 weeks after I graduated Ohio State, I just moved to Akron and went to law school. And I absolutely hated it. I think in my head, I was like, look, this is gonna be Law and Order. It's gonna be so exciting. I mean, whatever. And man, no, it's just relearning the same thing. I became a very good writer, but beyond that, it didn't really help me. And so I found myself coding, and I was like, I really just need to get back to the tech side of things. I went to a technical high school. I taught myself how to code despite not having a technical degree. Wow. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take the shot. So I moved to Seattle. And my first job, weirdly, in sports was working for a radio station. And so I was working for Starbucks, just trying to find a job. I was doing a World of Warcraft podcast. We're getting deep here, Neil. And I got discovered by CBS Radio, and they offered me a job, but it wasn't full time. And I was like, well, I can kind of code. And they're like, cool, we need somebody to help on the marketing site. And one of their radio stations was a sports site. And that's kind of how my weird career in sports started, was working for CBS Radio in Seattle. That I learned weirdly today is the exact same radio station that fired Jimmy Kimmel back in the 1980s for refusing to do a bit. I literally just learned that today. Fast forward, I'm not going to go through every month of this. So I spent a lot of time in tech, moved down to San Francisco. My first real startup was a company called Pecora. Pecora was one of the first visual social media analytics companies. So we were originally called Pinfluencer. So you can imagine what we started on Pinterest. And what we did is we crawled the internet for brands looking for usage of their content across the internet. So if you were Gap and you had a t-shirt, we would go and find where people were posting you on Pinterest or Tumblr or Instagram and give you analytics on that content. And I got the opportunity to work with some of the most incredible people. The guy who wrote the search algorithm we were using for, I can say all this stuff now because it's been decades, but the search algorithm to scrape Pinterest, we got in trouble multiple times because we were scraping Pinterest faster than they were understanding what was going on. They had no API at the time, but it taught us a lot about a couple of things. One, understanding large amounts of stuff, especially visually, that are happening on the internet. And two, how to deal with the peculiarities of scraping, and which is obviously like a hot topic here in AI today, how AI models learn and garner that knowledge and who owns rights and that type of thing. We had to deal with all those same things. We had all our same headbutts with the social platforms and things of that nature. So did that for quite a while. That company ended up getting acquired, ended up at Bleacher Report, which is, we're getting to the relevant part of the story. And myself and my co-founder, Tori, we were at Bleacher Report for a combined 12 years. And our roles at BR were running the engineering side of what was called the programming tools. What the programming tools did at BR, if you're not familiar with media publishing, is everything that runs the newsroom, basically. So the understanding of what's going on, the aggregation of content about what's going on, the labeling of that content, and then distribution of content to users. So if you're an OG BR head and use a TeamStream app, this is what was powering that. So our tools were used for things like finding all those tweets from the NBA and putting them in the feed. So if you're a LeBron fan, we gotcha. Or if you're down for league fits, like powering the league fits social accounts, there's always things going in there. And this is around the era of House of Highlights getting big and getting bought by Bleacher Report. This is when TNT got the rights to the NBA. So we got all this awesome access to highlights. It was a pretty awesome time. So did that for quite a while, learned a lot about personalization. We'll get to why it didn't work super well at the time, probably later. Did a detour in healthcare. I spent 10 years as a CTO in health tech. I've done everything from work on a toothbrush that maps your mouth and underwrites your insurance, to helping with women's reproductive health and customizable skincare. None of those things I thought I'd ever have on my resume when I took that radio job. And so I did that for a decade. And then when I got out of health tech, we originally set out to build a consumer app. So we were all kind of at this point in our careers, you can see the gray in my beard, midlife crisis time. And we were trying to decide, what are we going to do? We loved our time at BR. BR set out to have this mission of personalization that sports still has not even gotten close to deliver on, which is like, regardless of who you're a fan of, your version of being a fan of sports, we will be your sports app. So if you want to consume nothing but video about sneakers, we'll be your app. If you want to do hardcore fantasy and betting, we'll be your app. Yeah. And we never could quite get there. It took so much human intervention. I don't know if this is news to you, but media companies don't make a lot of money. And so it was challenging. We had 70 million users at the time, and you can imagine what it takes to try to personalize content for 70 million users at any level, let alone at the one-to-one level. And so it just kind of fell over. And it's not to say that Bleacher Report's not awesome, it's great, but it never really got to that vision, right? It was still covering, the big 5, 6, 7 leagues. If you loved somebody in La Liga, or you were into curling, or you were into motorsports, like there was nothing for you in the Bleacher Report app. And so we started out with that. It's not a good time to build a consumer app, not a good time to build something that looks like a sports media company, anything of that nature. But then we got super lucky, and we got connected with an old friend of ours, a guy named Robert, who is the CTO at the World Surf League, and saw an opportunity for us to take the tools that we'd built to run our own media company and actually make media better for both leagues, teams, and the media companies that inspired kind of the direction that we were going. And as you and I were talking about at the top of the call, it's taken me a while to refine how to describe what we do, and it does take a lot of industry knowledge of how media works, but it's been pretty awesome to go from our first conversation, where I probably could have gotten one sentence out of my mouth about the direction we were going, to where we are today, where at least I have, we've got these use cases. We're seeing how excited our customers are. We get that weird product market feeling maybe coming towards our direction, but it's been a pretty awesome journey.
I love it, and we're gonna get all into what you're doing with PressBox now, and the exciting growth and everything you have here. But I want to touch briefly on a lot of this goes back to personalization. And early on with TeamStream, I marked my favorite teams. I'm a Padres fan, I'm a Grizzlies fan, I'm a Ducks fan, and then it'll just surface me content about that. But there's when you think about the word personalization, what does that mean to you? Is it just literally like, I mark my favorite team and that's all you know about me, or going beyond that, what am I actually engaging with? What kind of content? What kind of highlights? Give me that fuller, more comprehensive understanding of what personalization means in reality.
Yes. So personalization has been stuck in what you described for a very, very long time. What was novel for Bleacher Report is now in every sports app that you download from the App Store, big or small, right? Tell them the teams you like, tell them the athletes you like, get a customized feed of some sort of that content. But personalization goes far further than that. Like if I, for example, have 20 minutes to figure out what the heck's going on in sports that day, I might prefer just an audio update of the news that's happened as I'm driving to work. Or maybe I consume all my sports in a newsletter, so I want everything to come in that way. Maybe I just want to see, I want to like, sometimes I think of this experience and it feels very like Minority Report, but like personalization should get to the point in which I can just have an app describe to it what I would like to see. Like, show me all the 3-pointers from the games this week, or show me just the highlights from these 3 teams, and be able to get that when I want it. And that's the level that we are shooting for. If you want to know every little mention that has ever been made about a news story on 50 different podcasts, we want to find that for you. If you want to get everything in a 5-minute newsletter and not care, great. If you care a ton about fantasy and want a super detailed fantasy report before and after every game so that you can prepare, like, those are the type of personalization experiences that are possible today. We can talk about all the obstacles that keep us from getting here from an industry's perspective, but like that is the personalization that is possible and nowhere near what is happening. And the places where you do see it happening, tickets, merch, places like that, you see the value that it can bring, but there's so much more dynamic stuff that we can do on the content side with stats and highlights and gambling. There's so many different aspects of how people enjoy sports. And right now, everything's just kind of one size fits all.
Is it ultimately like going to be on the user to send their signals proactively, saying, I like thumbs up on this, thumbs down on this? Or like, how do you combine a little bit of that proactive user and control alongside the, Henry Ford, I can build faster horse carriages, or I can build them a car.
Yes. So there's always going to be some of those signals. You have to take people at
Right.
face value. We have spent the last decade in this algorithmic trap that is like part of the reason why we're having this conversation, right? Following sports requires you to be very online and very all over the place and subject to the algorithms, right? Is it a legit story? Is it a rumor? Oh, that was reported 5 days ago. Oh, that got taken down because of rights violations, like et cetera, et cetera. And so we do have to have we do not want to take complete control away from the user. You never want to be in a situation where you feel like, I just don't know what's going to give me. I'm trying to trick you. Like, we all try to trick the algorithms into resetting for us, that type of thing. And so it's a combo of those signals, right? There's going to be things you tell us, both implicit and explicit, right? You tell us that you like the Baltimore Ravens, then you will get Baltimore Ravens news. I don't know why I picked them. I'm not a Ravens fan. You'll do the Baltimore Ravens, but then also like, oh man, you interact with a lot of video content, or you've connected your Reddit account. You probably would like to know what's going on Reddit in the sport. Those are the type of signals that we can also take in. Yes, there's some behavioral things, but we always want to be careful about over learning from those things. We've all done the watch one video on YouTube, and now our feed is nothing but that. And so when we're working with our partners, because obviously we have some control over this, but when we're working with media companies, leagues, et cetera, they have editorial control over the type of things that they are doing. We often talk to them about these use cases and what are good signals versus signals that are probably not going to get you anywhere, and how you can create an experience that like learns, but also has some outs so they can discover new things, right? Like, just finding out that someone only cares about music does not mean that the newsletter every week should have nothing but music in it, right? And so how do we help them like do that random sampling and find ways that like, oh, it actually turns out this person does like that content without like completely destroying the fan experience. So it's a little bit of a balance that we find. But to answer your original question, it really is gone so far beyond those explicit signals, but we have some responsibility here about what we do with those implicit signals.
No, I mean, there are times where I'm like, I want to search this on TikTok, but I'm afraid if I search it on TikTok, I'm like, my feed's never gonna be the same. Like,
it's like I needed a pair of sunglasses, and literally all I get on Instagram now is sunglasses. And I bought those sunglasses like 2 months ago. It's just the life that we lead on social right now. But when it comes to sports, like, it's also that the ultimate goal, whether it is a media company, but in particular with leagues and teams, is you're moving fans down the funnel, right? And so if you want to meet them where they are, which is why personalization has become so big, because right now content gets written for the hardcore fan, right? You watch the game, I give you the recap, you're into fantasy, I give you the recap. And so part of our personalization efforts is to get to these types of content that can get to those more casual fans, but you still want to convert them, right? Move them down the funnel, get them more excited about the sport. So you have to sprinkle some personalization in with some of that, like, hey, let's see if they will watch a game now, or if they're not a highlights watcher, let's see what it means to recommend them highlights. And so there's a lot of art behind it and not just science, because you do have to, it's a lot of how you approach the personalization as the end customer, not just in like the tech behind it that powers it.
yeah, no, I think that definitely rings true. I know that PressBox got started with some more underserved sports or motorsports that where fans are going to be more inclined to engage within that funnel a little bit more. I realized too, we kind of skipped over a little bit. Like, just tell us as well as you can, like what does the output of PressBox look like? What are you guys
Yes.
producing? And we talked about, you talked about like different formats of content you can create, that how you can aggregate a bunch of content, that you can make sure it's delivered in the right way for the right fan at the right time. So give our
Yes.
watchers, listeners, an understanding of that.
The easiest way to put us is that we help build automated media companies, meaning that we help media companies, whether that media company be an actual publisher, a la like an ESPN, Bleacher Report style, or a team, a league. You can see where this could go with companies, etc. And it does everything from understanding what is going on in that vertical. So in the case of sports, we've built all these agents. Those agents have a deep, nuanced understanding of sports. We are sitting on top of tons of information from news articles, podcasts, and media coverage. We follow social conversations with athletes and coaches and teams. We're on Reddit following that conversation. And what it does is it builds this corpus of data that powers our agents' ability to create very detailed, personalized sports content for fans. And so that can run a pretty wide gamut. We are in some cases, because the way we handle personalization is through tagging. OGBR people will know what I'm talking about, because you literally picture tags in the app when you're picking what you're doing. But we will go through in a much more detailed way and understand what a piece of content, either whether we're creating that content, we're ingesting it from someone else in that organization has done it, or we're pulling in third-party coverage. We are labeling it semantically about everything that's going on in that. So it's about these athletes, it's about this news item, it happened at this event. And that knowledge base then allows the league to turn all of that stuff happening around their sport into this super detailed content. So if you think today, when I write one of those event recaps, I'm just writing it for who I think the most important people are. If it's F1, I'm a huge F1 fan. I'll use a lot of F1 examples. You're just going to get like, here's what Max did. Maybe here's what Lewis did. Here's the winners, that type of thing. But what if I could write the intro to the recap, but that a tool could power part of that article page that is specific to what we know about that fan? So if they have a fantasy team, there's a graphic inserted with how their fantasy drivers did. We, in some cases, through data partnerships, have access to live results and things that are happening. So now that live graphic is following your drivers that are on your team, not just the people we choose to pick because the majority of fans like this person. And those are the type of experience we're enabling, from everything from article and content hubs to full-blown newsletters. We do audio output in partnership with 11 Labs. We also power stuff on the broadcast side of the equation. So things like these same tools that we use to highly research a piece of content is also good for broadcast, right? Because they're trying to understand what's going on in the event. What are all the past head-to-head matchups that have happened? What's going on at this venue that is historic? What are the milestones statistically that all the athletes may or may not meet during this event? And so it starts to become this powerful experience where, imagine getting a newsletter and you're a fan of Luka, and you get in that newsletter, hey, did you know Luka's like 2 threes away from setting this? You should buy a ticket and show up to the game. Like, it's starting to give that real contextual reason to show up, not just like, hey, I swapped your name out at the top, and I know you like jerseys, so here you go. Like, those are the levels of experience we're trying to enable, but the output is pretty wildly different. Sometimes we're integrating via APIs. Sometimes we are fully generating that output for our customers. We're definitely more of an enterprise style integration product than we are a SaaS product. We don't have people like putting in a credit card and like setting things up. We're often deeply integrating with our partners, their data, that type of thing.
No, it's well put, and it's like the promise of where we can get with technology today, with multimodal and LLMs and information indexing and all that fun stuff. And I want to kind of like hear about the journey a little bit of like going back to getting, coming up with BR and getting a better understanding of, okay, we think that we're doing personalization. We think this is working. We think this user likes this content. Like, this is a successful conversion, so to speak, or whatever. What? How do you know that what you're doing is working? What are the positive signals to send back into the algorithms, into your learning, into your systems to know that this is what the goal is? It's time spent, or more clicks, or less exits, wherever it might be.
Yep. Ultimately, the name of the game is engagement, but you have to have a flexible definition of what engagement means. And I think this is something that Bleacher Report figured out very early on that ESPN didn't. What I mean by that is Bleacher Report set out to build a app. They did not set out to build a way to access their website to read the news. And why that differentiation matters is like, I always point to like silly things that BR did before that others like take as commonplace. Spoiler mode, for example, and the ability to hide spoilers. The fact that we were one of the first partners with Apple to do rich push notifications, meaning we stopped caring whether you even made it into the app. You got everything in the push notification. That sounds, if I said those words to 95% of the people in media right now, they think they're like, no, Brian, what the hell? But we were taking a very approach to tech like in the way that a tech company would, right? It's like, hey, we're going to give it away for free. We're going to trust that we're making a good product, and that will bring you back. So if you're coming back for trivia, if you're coming back for scores, if you're coming back for highlights, if you just want to read a bunch of tweets, whether we wrote them or not, we weren't precious about that. And this was at a time when the industry was very precious about journalism in sports, right? Everything was like handwritten. No offense, I love The Athletic, but the Athletic's coming around and like we're going to like make journalism so great. And there is tons of room for that in sports, but the personal, that only goes so far. How many long form sports articles do you read a day? But how many highlights do you consume on the toilet, Neil? The answer is like hundreds over the course of a month, right? And so we started to figure out that like we just wanted you to spend time in app, regardless of what you were doing with that time. We wanted to be valuable to you as a sports fan. And the leagues and the companies that figure that out will get much further than the ones that think it's purely a content game. Just writing an article is one thing. Having this living experience where they can, like, a great example is F1 and multi-viewer, right? F1 gives away these APIs that let people build these tools that let you watch all from every single car on the track. They don't care if you ever turn on the actual broadcast. You just want to follow Carlos Sainz around on the track, you do that. And that became an official F1 TV product. Is that hours watched? That potentially taking sponsorship dollars away, if you think about it, Neil. Like the exposure and the lack of eyeballs that are no longer on all the cars and just on one car. Like all those things are impactful, but they did it for the fan experience because they watch fans doing that anyway. And they realized that you're going to stay more stuck if you just care about Lewis and can watch just Lewis than if we force you to watch the entire thing. And so that was like a very early thing we learned at BR. Like when we first started doing things like integrating with WSC, like the ability to do cool things, just like putting together highlight montages. So if you love Steph, we could just be like, hey, here's Steph's highlights from the game. We started learning that like that may be the only way people care about this Warriors game and otherwise may not watch the Warriors game. And the leagues that are okay with that versus the leagues that fight that trend, or where you start to see that line between the successful and the not successful. This is where you get a lot of the leagues that let things happen on social media tend to thrive than the ones who like clamp down on highlights and fair use and things of that nature. It's the same lessons that we learned at BR. The tighter ESPN got, the more that they were like, hey, we're not going to let you, like, we're going to give you a teaser and the push notification to make you read the article, the more people that came to BR. And I'd love to tell you, like, and this is no offense to anybody at BR, because a lot of this was built long before I got there, but like BR didn't get there because we were this amazing growth team, right? We were not growth hacking our way to those numbers. It was just natural. We were a little bit of a cultural moment. We were a little bit of like the right thing at the right time. And it just worked out really well for us. Not because we were great at advertising or that we were like awesome on the App Store. There's been a lot of cool features that didn't make a whole lot of sense for a free product. Like it didn't make revenue to do these things, but we learned that like you're more likely to read the content. Same reason why we featured other people's content. This is a conversation I have all the time. It's like, oh, wait, you want me to feature a competitor or like a third-party medium? Like they're going to read it anyway. Wouldn't you rather they read it within your ecosystem in the context of everything else you have going on in your sport versus like, nope, like we're not going to let those companies aggregate that content and then they're just not going to read it at all.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, as a fan, I want the best content, regardless of like, who delivered it, who published it, like, and that was part of the beauty. And I also, you're giving me nostalgia, memories of the first time I was able to like hard press a notification from BR, and like,
yes.
I was like, oh,
that was most directly us. My co-founder Tori was on the team that put a lot of that together. So it was, but those were the type of things that like there was no value in that, like from a revenue perspective, right? We couldn't sell ads in it. It actually kept people technically from going into the app, but we learned that like you got to them first. That's all that mattered. We put a lot of effort in beating ESPN to the punch on push notifications, and the team that put that work in there, it paid off in spades because it turns out we all have really short attention spans. And which are you going to remember? The person who got to you first and gave you everything you needed with the short press, or the one that got to you 15 minutes later, made you go into the app, log in, and then read like a 6-page article?
Gosh, oh yeah. I want to because I didn't plan to talk about this, but let's bring it up now. And that is sort of the idea of what the end goals are for a lot of these sports properties. I mean, you started to allude to it there a little bit of like ultimately, like I mean, we're not that far removed from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver making head waves and unintentionally talking about NBA being a highlights driven league, and then he later cleaned it up a little bit and saying, yeah, the highlights are great. They drive people to the live games, and of course he has to say that because they just signed $77 billion worth of media rights deals. And so at the end of the day, like because I think what you guys are helping to do is. And what you're describing to some degree is like you can be a fan in many different ways. You can be a fan you might be a fan that just loves listening to podcasts about your team. You can be a fan because you just love watching highlights. You can be a fan, you might want to watch the full game from buzzer to buzzer or from 0 to 0. Like, so when you think about what the end goals are for, the kind of content you're producing and ultimately the goals of your customers as well, like are we heading to a future where it's okay to be a fan where we're not just trying to push you to attend and watch a live game?
100%. So everybody has their fun origin story. My origin story was I went to the Barcelona GP and I read this book about like the birth, like the history of Formula One. But in particular, what struck me was Liberty Media's takeover of F1 and how they've changed the sport. And so I don't want to co-op any of this as my idea. I was just inspired heavily by this. And this is really what drives PressBox. If you view the sport as a sport, which is what we have for a very long time, you hold it very preciously. I mean, this is my word of the day, apparently. And you see things like, I mean, we grew up in that generation of like, you're not a real fan unless you're watching the games live, right? Why are you not sitting on the couch in your jersey with your bowl of Cheetos doing your thing? Like, it was America, right? That's how we watched, especially the Big Four, right? And we were okay if the sport stayed small. And I say we, not just fans. I'm talking about people at the leagues. I'm talking about the athletes themselves. Like there was an identity in that, like if you were not a fan, if you were not watching the game.
Yeah.
Over time, and especially in this age of these upstart leagues, brand matters more. And when you start viewing the league as a brand, you start to realize it's your job to help the league meet the fans where they are and where they're going so that you can both grow and adapt with the league. If you think about like you're a fashion brand, what you're producing today is going to have to change if you want to get the next kids coming in. And like a lot of the fashion brands like fail at that. So if you think about how our sports fandom is changing, my wife is a hardcore F1 fan, loves Oscar Piastri, gets like teary-eyed when he wrecks. And like, that woman did not watch a single F1 race for like years. But she's now a hardcore fan. And you know why? And I hate this example because it's the classic one, but Drive to Survive.
Yeah.
And Drive to Survive is not about everybody rush out and make your documentary, though I love them and I will binge all of them. But the reality is it showed that if you meet fans where they are and let them enjoy the aspects of the sport that matter, they will become fans and they will move their way down the funnel. And it turns out there's a finite amount of fans that are ever going to be hardcore sports fans. So do you just want to have 10 million hardcore sports fans? Or are you okay with another 10 million that might have some churn in it, but they buy some jerseys, they occasionally show up to games. They may not even know who's starting on the floor, but they think the jersey looks dope or they love watching the league fits. And that's been a big thing. Sneakers and music and collectibles. There's so many ways to interact with sports. And we'd poo-poo these as not real sports fans if they didn't also care about what's going on in the game. So it's funny, the highlight driven league, I view it as a compliment. Like to me, I would rather have that than be stuck in something like soccer that has a really, really hard time putting out very small short form content to pull people into the sport. Yeah. Like, yeah, it sucks and you lament that they're doing a lot more of it than you wanted them to on social versus coming back to your owned and operated. But like in the end, at least you have that. And that is something that can drive excitement. You can capture in a very exciting way what happens in the course of a basketball game in a very short amount of time. versus like NASCAR or Formula One can struggle with that type of stuff. You put
Yeah.
highlights for Formula One on there, and you're like, man, there wasn't a single overtake. I'm like, I love motorsports, and I'm willing to admit it is boring for long swaths of time. And so I don't necessarily view that as a negative. I view those other leagues at a disadvantage because what is their hook? If not doing stunts like Drive to Survive and that type of thing to get those social eyeballs, to get somebody interested, right? The more exciting the highlight, the more highlights it produces. This is why you see this weird spike of like influencer athletes that are maybe not super great at the sport, but one of the most popular athletes in that sport because they drive eyeballs.
Yeah.
And when you talk to leagues that have those, motorsports has a fair amount of these like influencers that quite frankly aren't very fast. Sorry, all of you, if you're listening, but like have millions and millions and millions of Instagram followers. And like, maybe I should embrace them
Yeah.
and leverage their audience. That sounds like duh, but like a lot of leagues you talk to are like, that makes me a little nervous. And it's not, they're not great at the competition. And like, so that like, it's like, but yeah, but if they're fans, right?
Totally. No, it's so much good stuff that we can dive into there further. I mean, there are fans who are like, if there is a whatever a race that's an F1 race is starting at 3 a.m. my time, you cannot pay me money to watch that race. I'm sleeping, and so it's like you
Yep.
have to realize that. And there are fans who are going to be NBA fans who like will never step foot in an arena because they're not able to travel. They live in whatever Kenya or South Africa or Australia.
Yep, they work a night job and the game's on when they're on. Like, there's a variety of reasons. They're too young. Like, like the kids don't have full control over their TV habits. There's like a ton of different reasons. And so I think the industry is getting there. They're starting to learn that the casual fan is actually incredibly valuable. And maybe it's actually, and this is like a direct quote from the book, it might be okay that they never convert. Like Formula One Liberty Media has come out and actively said, we're fine if not everybody falls down that funnel, which is like the smart thing, right? Would you rather have a temporary 5 million or nobody, right? Like it's, and so I think that is one of the bigger things that we've learned is like that leaning into those different types of fandom, expanding the definition of fandom by, practice of doing so gives you more opportunity to get fans. You will convert some of them, but also don't view the top of the funnel as just this like unconverted bunch that you're frustrated about. View them as like a good amount of revenue, probably. Yeah, they may only see one game a year. They may only buy a jersey every couple of years. But then they also may be like my wife and 2 years later just decide they find that one athlete they care about because they've stayed up on social and now they're a hardcore fan because they found that person that they could identify with.
Oh, and they might buy a jersey and then wear it around town, and all of a sudden, like their friends see it, and then like, and they're the only fan of your city in whatever New Zealand that it can spread like
Yes.
wildfire. So I
And
love
we're past the point where locale, I'm glad you said that because we're past the point where things like I'm from the city do enough to make you a fan of the sport. We're more fans of athletes than teams than we ever have been as like a human race following sports. And that is going to continue to be the case. I'm a LeBron James fan. Brian, who's your favorite NBA team? I don't have one.
Yeah.
I just really love LeBron James. I have since I was a kid. And there's a lot of that going on, especially when you get into these very individual driven sports. Like we do a lot of stuff in motorsports and aggressive sports and judge sports. And all those are very, very individual driven. And so they have already learned they have to rely on that. But like you just really need to be out there fishing, waiting for them to find that thing that pulls them into the sport and don't have a whole lot of judgment about what it is that pulls them in.
Oh, so such good stuff here. Having a great conversation here with Brian Hough, founder and CEO of PressBox, co-founder and CEO, I should say. Oh, I don't want to.
Yes, I don't want to upset my other founders. I love you guys.
But I think what we're getting at here, and what you clearly have a great visibility into, whether it's from how to produce content or how to personalize content, is you guys are able to probably just through automation and through analysis identify all these different types of ways to be a fan, and all different ways, like and different ways that I want to consume content about my sport. And maybe I want a straight down the middle recap. Maybe I want like a Bill Simmons like review of what happened, or maybe I want the betting angle, or maybe I want the fashion angle. And so like, what are you starting to learn about the types of different, like there's probably a almost infinite number of fan segments and cohorts out there that you can
Yes.
identify. And so what are you like learning about different fan segments? Where are the best opportunities to sort of develop these new fan segments and move them up the funnel? And how does that affect ultimately the type of content output that you guys are able to produce?
Yes. So one of the ways we got started just because of our background was content aggregation. And part of the reason why content aggregation was important to us is one of the patterns we were seeing is the gateways into the sport used to be one of two things: the sport itself or the people who own the broadcast rights to the sport. That was literally the only ways, right? Then we got some media companies and that type of thing, but we didn't have to the degree we have today where it's like, I know people who only follow Formula One through specific influencers, or people, and we talk about the Bundesliga giving rights to a YouTuber is a great example of how this is changing. I talk about the connections of the sport, like emotionally. Let's just also talk about like physically, right? Like you're learning about sports on Dude Perfect, or you're learning about sports because you follow this one particular influencer. There's this influencer in F1. Her name's Tony Collin Brown, and like I know people who that's the only way they consume F1 content. That's their vibe. They love how she approaches it. They love the specific niche that she talks about it. And so this is why aggregation was important. Like work with these folks. And I know that saying work with influencers is not a new thing, but it's not about like brand content and you telling them to go and develop a specific thing for you. It's how do I give fans who come into my sport through these alternative pathways that are not, it's like this weird version of not owned and operated that isn't like a traditional media company. So if I have 1 million people that engage in the sport through this podcast that's just some random people on YouTube, how do I make a pathway for those fans into my owned and operated properties, right? Is that partnerships? Is that featuring that content? One of the things that we do is we take this long form content and we identify pieces of, like, say, a YouTube video in which a particular news topic is being talked about. And so if you know a bunch of people in your audience are following this particular influencer on YouTube or Instagram, start working with them, pull in that content. Now it's like, oh, cool. Here's the 2 minute and 30-second blurb of what Tony thought of that news. I'm now more engaged. And there's a lot, like, I don't want to gloss over the rights and the fun of like, are the right people getting paid and that type of thing, because it is very much a thing that we need to be figuring out, not just in sports, but generally in media. But it goes to show you that, like, there's all of this marketing happening for free in sports in a way that it doesn't happen in any other industry to the degree that it does in sports. We're out there writing fan blogs left and right. We're out there creating our own networks to cover sports. We're doing all these crazy things. They are still in service of your brand and your sport. How do you leverage that in a way that both is authentic to those audiences, but pulls them closer to the mothership, so to speak, of the own and operate and getting them closer to the game, that type of thing?
Yeah, so it's almost like through that aggregation and through just find different ways or different areas where people are talking about the sport, whether influencers or not. Like, is it like? I think it's maybe a cliche to say, but obviously the tunnel arrivals now have become a thing, and others
Yes.
like, design the fields and like take care of the grass, like that becomes a thing on TikTok, or
Yep.
what players are eating, or the recovery, like all these different categories that are now emerging, and many will point to TikTok as like, hey, this stuff was interesting all along. People were never just exposed to it, and so is it sort of like, are you guys able to sort of help identify that stuff earlier on, or say, hey, Kai
Yes.
was on a stream and he talked about this team and he was really interested in this topic, and therefore it's like, how do you start to identify these areas that are different pathways into sports fandom or different categories that we should be leaning into?
Yeah, and so we didn't set out to build a media monitoring solution when we built the company, but it turns out that's what we needed to do, exactly what you described, is like, we want to do things like, so when we're looking at Reddit for conversations, it's not, hey, so you can go in there and participate like a Meltwater, like that type of social listening. What we're saying is like, man, this Reddit thread around this particular topic is getting tons of like engagement. Do you want to highlight this? Do you want to feature this in content in some way? Is there content we can create for you that rides on this trend? And so you can imagine how when we're doing that, we're crawling what's going on with athletes on Instagram, we're crawling what conversations are happening on Blue Sky. Like, find all these opportunities so you can take advantage of that in an authentic way, right? It's not about like brand tracking. It's not about like, oh, I want to get in there and comment so I can have my engagement metrics. It's knowing that, like, hey, it turns out when Kai does this, that's really engaging with his audience that also really likes us. What can we do with that information? Whether it's just aggregate it and do that, or whether it's like amplify it or build your own content around those same themes. And these things can happen at a variety of different levels. To your point, there's a lot of weird niches in sports, tons of weird niches. Like, a lot of my motorsports fandom is through sim racing, which is something that, like, there's probably 10,000 people on this earth that bother with the expense and the complication of doing it. But like, I get content about motorsports delivered to me all the time with a sim racing angle that keeps me engaged in that sport in a very, very real way. And that's a lot of work for me, one of 10,000 people for a league, right? You're not going to see F1 go out and try to invest a ton in this type of content. But if I can produce that type of content or be your central hub for that type of content, then I can get those fans. And so I can start. I think the bigger point is there's all these niches that all have these various different parts of fandom that they care about. And the easier you can produce content for those, the more likely you are to draw them into the other pieces of content. So this is why you're seeing like collectibles. Yahoo's invested very heavily in collectibles and collectibles news. Fanatics obviously has their collectible side of the business, and we can't ignore Whatnot just as a company. And that's a great example of what is a very specific niche. Like there's people who only follow sports because they have a bunch of NBA Funko Pops and a case behind them, right? Yeah. But like Yahoo recognizes that there's people who could be larger sports fans who are entering the sport because they picked up a pack of Topps cards at the gas station and those type of things. And so to me, that's really what it's about. It's not like there are all sorts of fun niches I learn about every day, but I think it's more about how do we help you find them and serve those niches and turn those people into a broader fan over time by giving them authentic content for where they are currently as a fan, not try to force it down their throat. Here's a bunch of highlights and you're like, I just thought the hat looked cool in pink. And you're like, yeah, cool. But then if I know that, how do I start catering to you? If you were like, oh, that means this person only bought merch, maybe they care about cool new merch drops. So what content are we doing about our merch drops? Like those type of things, not just spamming them e-commerce style, but like this is where like league fits and other things start to come in. And there's a variety of ways that we can like give you content, even if you just engaged with us because you thought the hat looked cool.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, like early on, Bleacher Report was a sports media brand, and then all of a sudden, there was one day, I don't know when this day was, but they're like, you know what, we should create this BR Kicks vertical because people really like shoes. And then it's like, okay, like how many more times does that iterate until you're like, we can either hire 100,000 people to try to keep track of all these different verticals, or this is where a company like PressBox comes in, where you can create 100,000 different verticals in theory, if there's enough of those little segments that merit such attention and merit such content production. And that's where the automation.
And the answer there is the sizes up and down are small. Like imagine the number of people collecting La Liga, no offense, La Liga, Funko Pops is probably small, right? But it is that exact point, right? How do we give these same superpowers that we saw work at the scale of Bleacher Report to a variety of different organizations that are trying to solve the same problems, and now in a way that doesn't require the awesome but very large editorial team that had to sit on the other side of these tools, right? Because the curation is not something that should be like undersold here. Like being on top of everything going on in a sport is challenging at a variety of levels. Just imagine even just being a social media manager at an NFL team, trying to keep track of every player on the roster, the things that are happening with them that you could be posting about, the rights deals the team has signed that you should be promoting. Like all these things are happening in all these disparate parts of the system. If we can get everybody in that same spot where it's like, oh, cool, we have this thing that is happening. Marketing can use this system for the content they need to make around this cool thing that's happening in the sport. Social can do the thing they need to. The broadcast team's tipped off about it, and everybody's working from that same kind of like insight or thing that has been found interesting, and then they can produce whatever type of content they need to do out of it, and do that with one person looking at a dashboard with agents helping them filter through it, not 45 people mindlessly doom scrolling Instagram trying to wait for LeBron to post, which is how we had to do it a lot of the time at BR, right?
Oh gosh, I have like memories of just like imagine how people were going through when Snapchat was really big, coming on quick with athletes. Like how do you keep track of that stuff? You just gotta like follow every athlete's story and hope that you can find something that's worth post-worthy. Good God.
Imagine being the tech team at like a BR or ESPN and something like, you know, LeBron gets traded and no one finds out until Waz just like drops the tweet, and then it's like, oh my God, I wasn't the first person to see that. Now I've lost. We go back to like it's interesting because like news breaking is something that has changed quite a bit from the old BR days. Like it used to be like exclusives mattered a whole lot, right? Yeah. You needed to be the first person to find that thing. Now it turns out that most people don't remember who broke the story within minutes of the thing happening. Right. And it's really just who has the most interesting take, who finds the right way to get in front of you. And while I won't say that speed doesn't still matter, obviously you still want to be the first place the person hears about it. It is perfectly viable to run a media company today without having your newsbreaker, because I think what people care about from a fandom perspective has just changed quite a bit. It's no longer cool to be the person who broke the story. I want to hear the 30-minute podcast conversation about why that was a horrible trade, right? Like that's the type of stuff that we desire a bit bit more than just the news itself. And that's why it's important for us to be able to stay on top of all of this, because even if we're not necessarily there the moment it happens, it gives you all of this corpus of content that you can then distribute to your fans over time as you're collecting it. And so a lot of what we've built is to help people stay on top of those exact trends so they can do that.
I want to also approach this from sort of the opposite angle. I mean, it's not a perfect 180 opposite, but it is, and that is sort of looking at the emerging sports that don't have a ton of volume out there yet. I mean, you mentioned early on that you guys have served some of those types of sports, and like ultimately LLMs, AI, etc., whatever you want to talk, whatever you want to talk about, it's only as good as the raw data that we have to access. So hence why
Yes.
those LLMs are scraping illegally in some cases because they want to need everything they can get. And so like, what are the lessons to take away for a sport that doesn't have that big corpus out there yet, or like maybe is trying to serve a different type of fan? Is not trying necessarily to get the fringe fan yet because they're still focused on trying to get that core fan base going and serve them first. So what are you kind of learning about that space of what can play out in the emerging sports space and what the pathways to success are so that you grow that corpus and then you can have those different pathways into fandom?
Yes. We ironically take a very similar approach that we've taken with just the company itself, which is like we start small with them, because you're right. And I'm not going to come on here and say that we've got this magic bullet that can take a sport that nobody's talking about and like turn it into this like super amazing thing. Like there has to be things happening around the sport, and there are. Like these leagues would not exist if there wasn't enough traction behind them from a fandom to exist. But how do you tap into that, right? How do you find those fans? How do you find the things they care about? And we start there because, for example, if you take, and this is not a real example, I made up one, but if you take a sport like curling, for example, that has its moments like a couple times a year, the Olympics comes around, everybody gets really excited. Like they find out that like, hey, people just want to know what's going on in the world of curling in a newsletter. And we'll often start with those simple of a project where it's like, how do we start building this functionality into your system? And sometimes even not even doing the personalization, right? Just helping you figure out everything that interesting that is going on in the sport. So these are the top curling athletes. A couple of them posted some cool content, like trying to find those opportunities in something small and then build up the fan base from there. Because you're right, like you don't want to go like I imagine there's no curling trading cards, and there's probably not like a big trading card collectibles community there, so you wouldn't spend time there. But you build up that, and when you build the personalization in from the beginning, the magic just happens over time versus having to do this huge lift and shift, right? Like it might start with just like personalized merch offers, a la something like a Fanatics does, but then over time as the league, because the league built it from the beginning, even like a few months in, now we've got all this data. If you're running a fantasy game, we can start doing fantasy reporting. We can start pulling like stats. And like, yeah, sometimes it can feel a little silly to be like, this is the biggest thing you've done since we started the league 4 games ago, right? But like you have to start somewhere, and that helps you build that. So when you get to season 2, now your broadcast team has all these awesome insights you spent the first year building. You've learned what does and doesn't work. We're collecting data from how your fans are interacting with your content. We're collecting data from how they're reacting to the stories you're telling on the broadcast, that type of thing. And you build it from the beginning. We try to start small. We're not, we can flex from somebody paying, 5-10 grand for us to ones that are paying, 7-figure deals, so that we can say, hey, we'll just start small so that in 3 years when the sport is blowing up, you already have all this stuff built in when it's time to turn on personalized newsletters, because now you have 5,000 fans and you've got a little bit of CDP data on them, and you've got a couple of years of highlights and articles that have been written about them, social content you've produced, that type of thing. We can start using that. More people are talking about you in the media, so we have more opportunities to feature you. But it is like, I don't want to say it's a magic bullet, but it is things that where you build it from scratch, it's a little bit easier than when you're trying to lift and shift in a lot of ways. Some of the bigger orgs we tend to work with are, right, where they didn't build it from the beginning and they're trying to figure out how to get an off ramp from a 10-year-old app that doesn't collect any of this information into something where they can deliver it. And so oftentimes that set of customers is a good example to help us sell the smaller customers of like, hey, it's a low investment, we're not trying to boil the ocean, but let's build the infrastructure for you, so when you're ready, when you want to take that from one newsletter to one-to-one newsletters or a newsletter per team or however you want to do it, we're there to help. Or if you want to produce an audio update and now you want to do a personalized audio update for your fantasy players, that type of thing, cool, let's do that. It makes it a lot easier too to sell into these leagues. This, like, this is the sales cycle here is brutal. The adoption cycle is even more brutal. And it helps us just plainly, both from ours and the adoption of our customers, the easier we can come on and the earliest we can show value, so they don't have to go and sell on some like 12-month long giant project, we can just say, hey, newsletters are a sticking point for you. We can come in turnkey. We'll absorb all your data. You don't need to do anything. And we will give you personalized newsletters. And then if you like that, then we'll keep going. Far easier than saying I need 250 grand and then I sit through the, you sit through the budget cycle, you sit through all the approval cycles, and they probably don't have the resources to accomplish the whole thing anyway. You just show them the value as more of the system comes into your world and how much more things they can personalize and how much more content they can produce as more teams are able to leverage the software.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like you don't want to synthetically produce extra content necessarily. You want to follow the fans where the sport is going and what's resonating, and iterate and grow as the sport grows, and go from there.
Exactly.
There's something I want to touch on too, Brian. This is something that actually has stuck in my mind since we talked about it on one of our earlier calls, like way back when. And that is the idea of kind of like, is there a sticking point of over personalization, of uber personalization? Like I know when I'm
Yes.
when I'm looking at my TikTok feed, I'm like oh, like I'm not seeing the stuff that people are talking about, like on like all the stuff that's blowing up that's viral, like, but it's for me only. And like if I'm looking on Netflix, I still want to know what everyone else is into and not just what's built for me. And so what's that balance like of, yes, personalization, but also not at the expense of discovery and what is broadly popular that people just want to see what's popular in the zeitgeist.
Yes, and I think those are all three separate points. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, you want to make sure when you're doing personalization that you give people a way to discover new things that might become part of their personalization, right? And it's hard because we talked about the implicit and explicit, not to go back down that rabbit hole, but like this is where it comes in, right? Are they explicitly telling me they now like this, or are they implicitly telling me I'm potentially overfitting and causing a situation where it is just purely about them? They're in their own. We've made an even worse version of the algorithm echo chamber. It's now your personal algorithmic echo chamber, and you can't get out. And some of this is an implementation thing. Like I won't pretend to have full control over this in every situation, but when we work with our customers, we often advise, like, look, if you just for the health of wanting to convert that fan, like to be very straightforward from a business perspective, you don't want to keep them in that specific personalized niche if your goal is to grow them out further, right? If you want them to, say, be more involved on the merch side, come buy event tickets, get involved in fantasy, or just move further and just like being less casual and more hardcore about the sport, you're not going to get there only by serving them Funko Pop videos all day, right? You've got to figure out how to do that. And then the big news is always a thing that we try to have them do separate, right? Like there's personalization when we produce like a news article, for example, we try to always do it in a way that is like, some of this is just the facts of what's happening, and then here's some things that is very obviously for how you care about it. We don't produce like 17-page article drivel, SEO, like AI style articles. We're often doing it where you'll write, hey, here's my basic recap. And we're turning that page into more of a dynamic experience of personalization. So it allows you to both see what everybody else is seeing, but also get a flavor of it that explains it in a way that makes sense to you. For example, we often point to Particle, which is a news app that's got really popular that does like AI news aggregation. And I spoke with their CEO, and like they have that very similar approach of like, it's like just the facts, man, right? Like, we want to make sure that you're getting the information you need, and then personalization is a layer on top of that versus changing what you see, if that makes sense. And so we're going to show you a recap. We still want you to be involved in the sport. We just may customize aspects of that recap to make it more likely for you to engage and be interested in that recap of the event than purely just like removing the recap because we don't think you like watching live games.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, is in that like you want to ultimately build fans of the sport as much as fans of the athletes, but fans of the team. Like I might never tell you that I'm a fan of. I never touch anything with the Lakers, never touch anything with Luka. But if Luka gets traded, like I'm gonna know about it because it's relevant to anyone who's remotely an NBA fan, And so like you don't want to miss that at the expense of doing something that may be against my stated preferences or whatever, or even past behaviors.
Exactly. And that's why we try to leave the editorial decision making as much as we can to the entities themselves and not us, so that the tech is not making the decisions. Like I said, I can't control editorial, but what I can do is guarantee that we're not doing things where it's like, oh, we're just not going to tell you about this piece of news because we don't think you like it. It'd be more that we try to tailor it in a way that makes it easier for you to consume, understand. A great example is, you can imagine in F1, there's a lot of technical things that happen. People get disqualified for like really complicated ways that are hard to explain to the average fan. When that news comes across to somebody we've tagged as a casual fan, it's probably got a sidebar in there that explains why wearing some stupid piece of wood on the bottom of the car down a millimeter is like the end of the world. And like it goes through the history of that and inserts a video explainer that we found and like that type of thing. Those are the levels of personalization I think get exciting in sports because it both meets the fan where they are, but allows them to then participate in the larger conversation versus shielding them from it because we think they're going to be intimidated by it because they don't understand the game or whatever. I always use cricket as an example because cricket's the game that everybody like thinks is going to blow up, but no one can ever figure out the rules type thing, right? And so you want to be able, you don't want to hide, if somebody's excited about cricket for some other random reason, we don't want to hide cricket from them because we think they'll be intimidated to learn it. You figure out how to give them that ramp into being a more hardcore fan by personalizing it with the level of content that you're delivering to them and the way it's delivered to them, not necessarily the content of it, if that makes sense.
No, definitely makes sense. You're setting me up here. We have to get this terrible stat in just a couple minutes, but I want to touch on something that just sparked in my head a little bit, and that is like ultimately like it goes out saying that that content that with polarization is going to drive a lot of engagement. If for better or for worse, if you make a polarized statement or a contradictory statement or something that is just really incendiary, people can't resist it. They're going to click on it, and whether that's good or bad for society at large, Stephen A. Smith's made a lot of money off of it, among others as well.
Yes.
So when you guys are thinking about optimizing content, and that both means aggregating from maybe sources that are really reputable and by the book and official, and then others who are just more general daily users, and then also just the aspect of people say they don't want to click on this, they don't like all the arguments, but they click on it, and so it's like, do you lean into ultimately what people do, and even if at the expense of what feels right? I guess I'm not articulating the right way, but I'll
no, it makes. I get where you're going. It's one thing that is nice about sports. I have all the respect in the world for people building newsroom technology and like political news and things of that nature. My heart goes out to you. Sports is an interesting space because most of the rights holders or the people who want to stay on the right side of the rights holders, generally speaking, which I think we can classify the media probably as, they'll say they're journalists, but like ESPN needs the NFL to like them, right? Like, and they do the things that they do. And so I think in a world where the brand protection is so important, we actually do a lot more of just trying to make sure that we are not publishing things that would just be negative to the brand generally. And that's a slippery slope. I would be very careful how I word this. This is not about saying someone's critical about a post. Obviously, if the NBA, and they don't, were to use our technology, they probably would not want us to post that on their homepage. But that is very different than artificial censorship. And that is not a role that we try to play anywhere in this. Our centralized newsroom says, here's everything that is going on. The decision on whether or not to use that, we don't target personalization on things like, oh, it turns out if we give them this type of content more, they click it more. We don't actually do performance in that way. So we are not changing what shows up in a feed purely based on whether you interact with it more or not. We use what you interact with it more to understand what you care about based on that labeling I referenced a long time ago. So if I have like, you have interacted with these 35 different articles, and the aspects of those articles are not like, oh, is this incendiary, or is this a hot take, or it's usually more things like, oh, this article is about technical aerodynamics, or this is about drafting for your fantasy team, or this is about league fits or things of that nature. And so we tend to more create a mesh of what that person cares about from that perspective more than we're going out and engagement farming. We are not an algorithm. There is no algorithm behind how our content gets selected. It's more about a tagging perspective where we're like, hey, this is the type of things that you've told us very directly you care about from a semantic level, meaning that like it is a topic of conversation, it is a subject, it's an athlete, it's a team, it's like that type of thing, or that you prefer to engage with written content or podcast content or video content. We never want to be in the business of clickbait farming or things of that nature, and we don't build our technology to write things in that way. They are more influenced by editorial decisions than the performance of the underlying content. That makes
Gotcha. Oh,
sense.
that definitely helps clarify things. It makes me feel better too about what
Because it's the problem that we have today. That's why we get what we get, right? Is because it's very heavily leaning into what our fingers clicking on the button is saying than what our mind is saying. And I think what we're learning is those things are not usually the same thing in a lot of cases. Like, how much stuff do you view on TikTok just like randomly that comes across your brain that you would go actively out to seek if it didn't
right.
show up in your feed, right? And some of that is because of the behaviors you're doing. You couldn't tell me what those behaviors were, right? You just know that I viewed a bunch of things and somehow this is what the algorithm thought that I meant. We're trying to approach it in a different way, albeit a more simplistic way that just gives you the type of stuff that you care about. If you want highlights about Steph hitting threes, that's the type of personalization we want to desire. If like people talking crap about players in a negative way is the only way you engage with the sport, that's not really the type of personalization we're necessarily aiming to solve for. And we just get that naturally because that's not the type of brand that the companies that we're trying to build with want to do, right? You know, a league is not going to go out there and just want that to be their brand. And we probably wouldn't work with a partner that was the angle that they were going. But we do a lot of minor versions of this. Like we're detecting spoilers because we have customers that want to filter spoilers out for specific types of fans. We want to be able to properly identify rumors, and so we do a lot of like outlet rating to make sure that like when we report that a piece of news is happening that is coming from a reputable source, we like certain people can only be newsbreakers. Other people, no matter how big of a website you are, we wait till somebody else reports it before we do it. Like we're trying to have journalistic integrity as much as there's journalism happening here in the news identification, but it's really not about, we're not out there farming clicks. That is not what the software was built for. It's more to be like, hey, fans will be more engaged if you give them this bundle of content in the way that we are doing it, more so than we're trying to farm it down to like, you click this thing a lot, so we're going to do more of that thing.
Oh, so much more I want to touch on. I'd be remiss, but we're going to bring it back full circle to some extent, and then we'll get to some turtle stat. I promise, Brian. I've kept
All right.
it longer than I said I would, but you're kicking ass, and that is sort of the business implications of all this as well, and ultimately like what are we driving toward? Like, and there's fan journeys. It is the goal of content to get them to ultimately take an action that's valuable to us, whether it's buying a piece of merch or downloading this app or submitting a wager or a bet. Like, is it just developing fandom through content and then we can serve them more targeted ads, or is it adding some of this data that you're learning about fans into their CRM so they can send better offers? Like, what are the business implications that we should be aware of about what we can do with personalization?
Yes. So that is obviously all part of it. I think to me, I've seen it approached a few different ways. One is to very much drive direct revenue, right? When you can tie content to things, I gave the ticket example for Luca, right? Like if you can drive things happening in the sport to actions you want fans to take, buy a ticket, buy a piece of merch, show up to an event, et cetera, like content has a lot of power to play there that is beyond the marketing type of content that tends to happen, right? Just saying, most of the time when I tell you to come to a game, it has nothing to do with what's going on in the game. It's just to tell you that you should come to the game. Bobblehead night, right? Like those type of things. Yeah. And so I think that is one place where personalization can play in. Personalization itself, though, has been a larger interest for driving revenue itself than I was expecting coming into it. We certainly have ad use cases, branded content, the usual stuff we tend to see in sports media. But because owned and operated is becoming more and more important for leagues as their distribution gets more dispersed, go back to the YouTube comment. What are leagues going to do when they have 45 different YouTube channels is how people find the Bundesliga, right? And so if you can then, and I generally describe this as plus subscriptions. So like League Plus, meaning that like I'm getting multi-viewer cams, like an F1 TV subscription. And part of that is it's tied to our fantasy game. And that fantasy game is tied to the personalization you see in the app. So I'm delivering news stories about the drivers you've told us are important. I give you betting intelligence. We do a lot of work in like the betting odds, fantasy, daily fantasy, things of that nature. Personalization is now a paid feature in that world where it's like, cool, now you're going to give me some edge that I wasn't going to get if I didn't pay the $9.99. And that's being driven by our agents who are looking at how the odds are shifting, looking at the content that's happening. And we'll even, like an example we always give is when we work, one of our customers working with on broadcast, they talked about how their athletes' equipment got broke on the flight into the event, and the only way anyone knew about it was because that person posted it to Instagram, and it moved all these betting odds. And so that's where content and finding that makes people feel like they have an
Yeah.
edge. And so there's a lot of companies, a lot of leagues out there that are building these style of subscription products, bringing some more of their streaming in. There's like, oh, we'll put a couple races exclusively in the app has been a thing you've heard NASCAR flirt with, like, and so that is where they're going. And so personalization becomes the thing they're selling, right? The NBA TV subscriptions, all this are just the tip of the spear, in my opinion, in which you're just going to have an NBA subscription one day. And that NBA subscription is going to include some fun packages and perks and different levels. Maybe I can go to some events. Maybe I'm getting these cool app features. You got companies like Jump that are tying all these different aspects of the in-event experience together. And it's not hard to picture. We got these ESPN, NFL getting into bed deals. Like, the media around the sport and the personalization that happens around it and the sport itself are getting very, very like blurry where those lines are. And I think this is where personalization comes in and becomes a revenue driver in itself. We will help you enjoy every aspect of being a Lakers fan in a highly personalized way, from the concessions you buy to the jersey waiting for you at the end of the game to the news content that comes to you as the game's happening. Like, all of those type of things I think are eventually just going to be blurred together.
I love it. It's a great place to leave us. There's more we could go into, and we will have some more fun with Brian in our quick tap segment. The first episode of Shareable Stat coming up right now. Just awesome, awesome stuff. Being able to pick the brain of Brian Hough, co-founder and CEO of PressBox. I hope you learned a lot. I sure did. But stick around because we're gonna have more fun with Brian and with our quick hitting question segment. But first, episode's Shareable Stat. This episode's Shareable Stat looks at U.S. users of social media. When we talk about and throw around big stats around number of users and MAUs, monthly active users, and DAUs, daily active users, they are often looking at it from a global perspective. But what happens when you think about it from just a U.S. perspective? Just some interesting stats that came out, in Q3, toward the end of Q3, early Q4 here, and that is, if I were to ask you which is the app with the most U.S. monthly active users and daily active users, which would you answer? Well, daily active users, it's Facebook in the US, but monthly active users, it is TikTok. TikTok recently surpassed Instagram, followed by Facebook, and then actually in fourth place, an interesting one as well, is actually Pinterest, which has a lot of MAUs, but a little bit lower on the DAU count. And so that's a pretty stunning thing. Yes, if you combine all of Meta's apps, of course, they're gonna be the biggest US behemoth that we know it is. But TikTok has now taken the cake, and yes, TikTok still remains a little bit in flux as we wait for the sale to go through, presumably, and what that could mean for the app and its future and the algorithm and all that, and whether a U.S. only app will be just successful and then the algorithm just successful. But TikTok, the most monthly active users and the second most DAUs with over 100 million, 183 million U.S. monthly active users. That's looking at both iOS and Android. So what does that mean? What can you take away from that? Certainly it's not a secret that TikTok is really popular in the world and certainly in the US. But how can you start to leverage that on a more daily basis? I think yes, we're still definitely posting on TikTok very often at high volume because the more you post, the more your videos have a chance to go viral in the feed, as we all want it to do, and drive engagement. There's also a little bit of thinking about community. What kind of community elements can you start to think about with TikTok? Yes, also think about that TikTok has recently, introduced their version of IG broadcast channels. TikTok has stories as well. Can you turn TikTok into a place to check during live events and make it truly take advantage of that daily habit as Twitter continues to sort of diminish or at least hit a plateau? Maybe not so much in the sports space still, but some sports fans are certainly leaving Twitter. Can TikTok and TikTok stories be a place where you can, share some of that game day content, that game day story? I don't know. Maybe it's worth experimenting. And as TikTok has continued to grow in the different types of formats that it supports, with carousels, and of course we mentioned stories, we mentioned those sort of broadcast channels, collabs, and all that as well. Just certainly worthwhile every once in a while, whether this goes across all platforms, across all apps, to take a step back and innovate. Think about if we're spending 9% of the time doing what we know is our bread and butter, what's the 10% of the time that we can think about different ways to leverage a platform, different ways to package content? Trying out some of the new features is always a good idea because those platforms, those social media platforms, want to push their new features. So it's lots to think about here. I can ramble on all day about this, as I probably already have a little bit, but again, the social media network with the most US users on a monthly basis is now TikTok, recently surpassing Instagram and Facebook. All right, that's a simple shareable stat. Think about it, talk about it, ponder it, take action on it. More importantly, stick around because we're gonna have some more fun and learn some more. There's some good stories coming up here, trust me, with Brian Hough of PressBox. Back from this episode of Shareable Stat, and I'm joined once again by Brian Hough. He is the co-founder and CEO of PressBox. Brian, you kicked ass in your interview. Are you now ready for some personalized quick taps?
Oh, personalized. Uh-oh. All right, I better do good on these. I
I
feel like
wrote
that'll
wrote
undercut
these
my
questions
authority.
just for you. Wrote these questions just
All
for you, man.
right, all right, let's do it.
Number one, this is always an interesting one for founders. Tell me the biggest lesson you learned so far from founding a company and running a startup, and just what's it been like so far?
It's been, I mean, everyone says it's a roller coaster. Everyone says you can't be prepared for how big of a roller coaster it is. But if you were to talk to Brian of like March of this year, you would not recognize him. He probably looked like the world was ending. He was probably going to have to go back to work. Like it's just, it's so hard. And there's a line between delusional and believing in the thing that you're doing, and flirting with that line is probably the hardest thing about being a founder and starting a company. Is like, am I nuts, or am I just onto the thing these people haven't figured out yet? And so that, like, and sometimes the answer is you're just nuts, and I've definitely been wrong quite a few times, but that's probably like my biggest lesson from all of this is like, you just have to be prepared that the lows will be really, really low, and sometimes you'll be wrong about whether that's the bottom or there's further to go. But the highs could also be really, really high, and no
Yeah.
matter how much I say this and how prepared you think you are, it's still going to feel like a very weird feeling.
It's exhilarating in both the good ways and the bad ways. There, one day you think the company's not going to last another month, and the next day it's like we're going to take over the world.
Yes, it's like, oh, would you like to raise money? And it's like, raise money? I was trying to figure out where, like, how I was going to exist till tomorrow. So yes, that it is. It's a roller coaster. It doesn't work out for all of us. Like it's still very early for us, but it's worth. I enjoy it. I was probably unemployable otherwise, so it works great. Too many ideas.
Number two for you, Brian, going to looking at your non-sports jobs. Tell me your favorite project or product that you got to work on from your non-sports life.
Oh man, I don't know if this counts as non-sports because sports has been such a part of my life. Podcasting has always been near and dear to my heart. I was podcasting like OG before people even knew what podcasting was. I've gotten to do some really, really cool stuff. I got really big in the World of Warcraft podcasting community, which is how I got my first job.
Sports space before esports was big.
Yes, when I was at Bleacher Report too, I also was the head. I was basically hosting with my good buddy Seven the official E-League podcast for to Counter-Strike and that type of thing. And so I had those weird two jobs. So that's probably my favorite. It's led to a lot of opportunities. A good portion of the people at PressBox all have ties to that weird esports podcast from back in the day. And so it's just one of my favorite stories. It's like, yes, and we also know each other through esports. And so
So, real quick, then, buy or sell stock in esports as a vertical. I think it's gone through its bubbly times. Like, where we're looking at.
I think gaming in general is still has a lot of upside, but we got to move past the Twitch era of how we're going to interact with gaming. I think esports is being, and sorry, my esports fam, I love each and every one of you, but I think it is being significantly propped up by money from a couple of very specific places, and it has not fully recovered from the winter that COVID put us through. And I think we're naive to think that it has. I love esports. I like as somebody, I was that person who was at Bleacher Report, a sports company, trying to be an advocate for esports. You could imagine what that was like. The number of times I've been told it's not a sport, but I don't think it boils down to that. I think we just thought it was going to make way more money than it was ever going to make. And if we would have slowly grown it, we would not be here. And I hope it bounces back eventually.
I think it's interesting too to see that like trying to apply old traditional sports business paradigms onto esports, and whether that was right or wrong, I think we're seeing that maybe we should rethink. It's not just copy and paste this league's model onto an esports league.
We were so, like, I could only say parts of this, but we were so close to what was going on when Overwatch League and all of that was coming out, and watching these like tens of millions of dollars franchise fees comes out when we can't even getting single digit millions for like NWSL in its early days. Like, you just know that we were nuts. Like, I love gaming, but Overwatch was not going to make more money than women's soccer, but people were investing in it in that way. And it's just like VC. With the expectations get too unrealistic, you can kill an otherwise successful thing. And I feel like that's what happened with esports early on.
Number three, we're going to probably some fun and happy memories. You mentioned going to Ohio State. A lot of fun. I'm jealous. You got to see a lot of cool stuff there, probably. So tell me the most memorable sports event you attended during your time at Ohio State.
And this is not going to be what you were asking, but pretty close because I have a weird relationship with Ohio State. So in my very first job in college was a valet at the airport, and I got to take John Cooper to the airport through the time in which he got fired, and you can imagine what that was like. But I'll tell you what, what's weird about being an Ohio State fan is you get to see about the best and the worst of college football. So I've seen like Ohio State and the Michigan rivalry and everything that comes with that, including watching like grown men scream at small children wearing the wrong jersey on either side, and that has always weirdly stuck with me. I don't know why, and I don't know what life lesson I'm going to take from it, but it goes to show you the sports can be negative. So sometimes folks like take a chill pill. That 6-year-old just put on the Michigan jersey because his dad likes him. It's okay.
Oh man, cool. I mean, cool memory of John Cooper, and you've lived mostly a pretty fun life, I think, as an Ohio State fan, and certainly
yes, I'm one of 5 people who's driven John Cooper's Cadillac, baby. That's probably my claim to fame, right?
That's awesome. Number 4, I'm gonna set you up, tee you up. Tell us a cool success story from a PressBox customer and how it came together.
Oh man, I wrote about this recently, and I can't say the customer, so sorry I have to dance around this. But no broadcast background at all whatsoever. We're all media babies. We just we're in the cocoon of Bleacher Report. You probably can't even call us journalists of any sort. But I feel like when we got connected with the broadcast team and we saw how manual broadcast still is, even at the biggest of leagues. Like if you watch the NBA, you'll watch them shuffle that giant stack of papers out at the end of every quarter so they could read through and figure out what happened. And in our first week, we took something that was taking the broadcast team at this league 40 hours before every single event to try to recreate all this research so that the broadcast team would have something to talk about for the first 30 minutes until everything changed and went to hell. And the fact that there was still that opportunity and we were so quickly able to support the broadcast team and be able to save tons of hours, which obviously always looks great when you're a software company, but also change the quality of the narrative that can happen on air, because now instead of trying to flip through 45 pages, I've got a dashboard that knows that head-to-head matchup just happened in the bracket, and I've got all the context in front of me. It was pretty awesome to see. And still kind of crazy for those of us who have not worked in sports broadcast to know that that's still a thing that's happening every day.
Totally. I mean, it's not that long ago where I remember being a sports info intern or sports info, doing the clips every day, getting literally going through every publication you could find and seeing if there's stories about your team. Just, oh gosh.
And if you don't find it fast enough, it just doesn't get mentioned on the broadcast. And then someone finds it. That poor guy who's got to write all the SQL every day finds it 3 days later, and it gets posted on social. And it's rough out there. And that was not a use case at all that we envisioned when we built the product. So it was pretty awesome to see.
Number 5 here, Brian. You mentioned how there's different ways to package and present and content, different ways to consume content. So tell me the sports fan content consumption medium or packaging, whatever terminology you want to use, that you're highest on right now for the future.
Man, YouTube feels like such a cop-out here, but YouTube is just changing how we're consuming sports media. And I don't just mean highlights, this Kawhi Leonard stuff and how much of that is just played out in YouTube podcasts and various other things. With Pablo Torre has been just a fascinating thing to happen. But we are months probably away from news being broken by fans. Maybe in small sports to start, it may already be happening today, but YouTube just excites me because it brings me things in formats that are very, very flexible. I can choose whether I want it short form or long form, and it's giving voices to people. And I know this is social in general, but YouTube has just uniquely nailed it in a way that just lets me casually consume it without doom scrolling, without things being wildly out of date, because that's Instagram for all of us. It's just full of crap and things that we're trying to filter through, and it allows me to have a focused enough of an experience. And I think ignoring that platform and ignoring the various ways you could deliver video, whether it's everything from faceless text-based video to full-blown podcasts, I think people are just sleeping on that, which seems crazy to think where YouTube is. But how many leagues are still just dipping their toe in what they're doing on YouTube, or the influencer sphere, and embracing them as journalists and things of that nature is just still very exciting, but still very nascent.
What's your POV on the VTubers of it all? Is there a future where there will be an AI avatar that is ultimately pulling from a little bit from Pablo Torre, a little bit from Bill Simmons, a little bit from here, and delivering me what feels like a personal YouTube video?
If the money existed, if anybody's listening, I'm still willing to build this. If the money existed in the VC space to build what you described, that is what I ultimately set out to build in this company. I think There is a version of this in which everybody has a media AI agent in their pocket. This is what Particle and Artifact have set out to be. This is what even Yahoo has tried to be to a certain degree, that just lets me program my own media consumption. Yeah. That is the thing I really want to give me. The sports app that lets me say, hey, just show me what Steph did in the game and like throw it up. Like, it sounds very sci-fi movie-ish, but like, we're more tech and rights problems away from that happening than we are in the ability to make that stuff happen. It's about getting integrations. It's about getting people to like be a little less precious with their highlights, like those type of things. But the tech to be able to do that exists today. There's just not the financial reason to do it for fans yet.
Yeah. Every once in a while, I'll go into like the ChatGPT and be like, write me a 500-word article about this topic in with this kind of style, or like write me an oral history of this story that I'm really interested in, and like you can create your own content.
And the fact that people are still willing to do that 3 years after ChatGPT blew up, Neil, is mind-boggling to me. And that's not the interface you should have, right? The chat is the dumbest way to approach AI, but it's the only way that we have today. But when I can get to the point where I can do that without having to like write a prompt and worry about what comes back and all of that, and it just comes back in this cool little like video slideshow I can flip through or whatever, like I think that's where it's going to be. I just don't know what the business and financial model is that makes what I just described successful, right? Because we're not in an age where people are going, you're not going to get in mass people paying, $50 a month for a media consumption service or something of that nature. It's going to take somebody who's got a lot of clout and a lot of eyeballs to invest in it and make it real, and then enough people will come along and follow. But that is, to me, that's actual personalization. Like, to go back, bring it full circle, that's real personalization. I literally am telling you in the moment what I want, and you're able to give it to me, but you're also enhancing it with things that I didn't know that I wanted at the same time. Yeah. Which AI is weirdly good at, not consistently, but we've all had that moment where you're like, you read my flipping mind. And like, you can still give that, but that's not going to happen in a chat prompt interface. Yeah. Like, that's going to happen in some experience we haven't quite yet figured out.
Really interesting to think about. Really insightful. Number 6 story round coming down the wire here with Brian Hough of PressBox. Tell me, what is the looking at generative AI and how it affects software development, coding, and all that. What does the near-term end game look like and for software development? And I guess if you can, speculate on the long term.
Oh man. So the first one is highly dependent on you and your company's opinion of AI. We are very, very AI forward when it comes to engineering a PressBox. We're all Claude Code users. We're probably costing them far more money than we're paying. And people, it sucks right now if you were a junior developer. And having been someone who came into software development with a non-traditional background, life is hard for those folks, because the things that made it hard to be a software engineer at the early days, learning language, figuring out how to do the thing in JavaScript, understand the architecture things, is not what AI helps with. AI helps the people that know those things be really, really fast. Vibe coding is a bunch of BS. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to swear on this show, but it is a bunch of BS. But if you know what you're doing and your company lets you work with these type of tools, people are faster than they've ever been. The amount of work and I'm not saying this is like a founder and getting people to give me money, though you can. It's more of just like, I've been fascinated by a bunch of software engineers that I've spent decades working together with, how much faster we are, because now we're not having to Google for 15 minutes how to do this thing that doesn't really matter and I just need out of the way. AI is amazing at that type of stuff. Yeah. If you think you're going to vibe code yourself to a full solution that's going to make you millions and millions of dollars, don't believe the LinkedIn posts. Those things are very, very rare, and most of those people's companies are going to fall apart 6 months from now. There's going to be a cottage industry in the midterm of consultancies that come in and turn your vibe coded BS into real apps. That's my big prediction for the midterm, is if you are a really good software engineer that weathered this storm, there's a middle ground before things get scary good, in which you're going to be cleaning up a lot of BS from people who believe the hype that you could just like vibe code it. Long term, it's so wrapped up in AI generally that I think I am both a realist and an optimist, in that like there's a lot of scary stuff going on and we're going to make a lot of mistakes and do a lot of dumb things with AI generally as a human race before we figure out the right way of using it. But I also think that if we can build tools to help humans do better and higher level versions. And I'm not saying this in the Sam Altman hand wavy. You mentioned the like, I don't want your job to be filtering through Dropbox trying to find crappy clips. I want you to feel like an artist trying to find a million different constructions of those clips to make fans more excited. And that's a very idealistic view of the world, but we approach our tooling more of that version. It's not to write articles so you don't have to hire a writer. It's so that one writer can speak to 80 fans or 800 fans or 8,000 fans with their piece that all have different preferences, and that's ultimately where we want to take it.
I like it. It feels like an optimistic view of the present and the future.
Someone's
I
going
like
to
that
hear
vibe.
this and leave a nasty comment, and I'm a tech bro, and that's fine. Like it's just the world we live in. But ultimately, like I hope that's where we can take it. I say I'm a realist because I recognize looking at the world around us, it doesn't feel like that's where we're taking it, and
Yeah.
not everybody is trying to take it that way. But from my perspective, sports has always been made by people who work in it and the fans that consume it. And I don't think robotizing one side of it, whether that's the athletes or the journalists writing about it, is going to be the solution to making people like sports more.
Here, here. I like it. Number seven, you mentioned being a fan of F1 yourself, and also working with diverse motorsports. So tell me, like,
Yes.
what have you learned about motorsports fans, and how they consume content? What should we know about how people are experiencing motorsports and what the kind of the growth trajectory looks like for some of the because we're seeing like Liberty Media. I'm really excited to see what they do with MotoGP, for example.
Yes.
Is that the next F1?
MotoGP in some markets is larger than F1, and you would never know it. So I'm very, very excited to see what Liberty is able to do with MotoGP, especially when they've got the F1 rub. You got people like Lewis Hamilton and Max wanting to get into MotoGP teams. Like, all those things are awesome. Motorsports is one of the hardest sports to be a fan of on two levels. It's incredibly hard to understand, and the participatory element is punishing to a degree that it almost kills the sport itself. You want to talk about a sport that is propped up by the advertising model and sponsorship? Welcome to motorsports, everybody. But what I've learned is that there are maybe, and this is controversial and probably not actually accurate, but I would argue that there are more casual motorsports fans than hardcore motorsports fans, and the motorsports that have figured that out and leaned into it, a la an F1, are the ones that are winning, and the ones that are trying to lean into their old school European legacies, I won't name names, are suffering. And that is probably the biggest thing I've learned, is that motorsports fans is probably the most, like, one example I'll give, I'll steal this from the previously mentioned Tony. She often uses the example of Justin Bieber and Hailey Bieber and her she has like the lip gloss brand, and this brand blew up in motorsports with no advertising because a bunch of female fans that people would probably not qualify as fans under the traditional definition of the term have just made it a thing in motorsports, and that has blown up. And I cannot tell you the number of women I've talked to that became F1 fans for no other reason than they saw this phone case that the lip gloss goes in the back in some F1 highlights, and that got them curious, and they bought the phone case, but then they also started watching F1. And to me, motorsports, not the saying that it's like the same as every other sport, but it is a blueprint that you can follow, that if you could adopt that for other fans, I think there's other ways to grow by doing those type of things. And that's been awesome because you would not expect it from something that has largely been driven by European white men with lots and lots of money to race cars in a circle. So.
Right. No, if nothing else, like if you look at the biggest motorsports leagues in the world, like I guess NASCAR and F1, they have very distinct cultures and brands, and it's the cultural like fandom as much as it is like who's the science of the cars, and I think that's a really interesting way
Yes.
to look at it.
Yes,
I,
and you have to be able to adapt. And I'd argue that F1 has done a better job than NASCAR. Like, I think NASCAR has been consumed by its culture to a certain degree, where it makes personalization harder for them. And the more that F1 has leaned away from its Euro, like luxury roots or whatever you want to
yeah,
call it, and more into the regular fandom, the more that has helped. I think NASCAR needs to figure out how to speak to the people that are not there for that very specific experience. It makes NASCAR awesome. The trailers, the barbecue, the like
right.
all that type of stuff. But if you're like some just middle-aged, middle-class white guy on the coasts, how do I speak to them in a way that's still authentic to the brand? I think Formula One has figured out a little bit better how to reach outside of that ecosystem than NASCAR has. And I think some of it has to come to do with the fact that NASCAR has a very firm footprint in the US at a very large market, and F1 does not have that luxury of an anchor market with hundreds of millions of fans. They have to piece it together from a bunch of different areas of the world, so they've had to be more dynamic than NASCAR's had to be.
No, it's a really good insight. You're making me think of a lot of other things I want to go into, but I realize it's not the long form part of the interview. This is the quick.
We'll just start a regular podcast together, Neil. Let's do this on a regular basis.
It is time for our food question. Always got a food question. So tell me if I go up and hang out with you, up in the PNW in Washington. Tell me the best meal to get and where to get it.
Oh man, this is gonna be so boring. So I live in this little town called Bellingham. It's near the border, somewhere between Seattle and Vancouver. We have this like literal 100-year-old grocery store here, and they have the most amazing breakfast that you've ever had in your life. It's just an old school diner breakfast. It's called Nelson's Diner. If you ever come to Bellingham, you absolutely have to have it. I am from the Midwest, so I'm used to the comfort food, biscuits and gravy, that type of thing. Come out here, everybody's a vegan, and I found this place, and I'm like, yes, this is for me. So like every Saturday before we go on our hike, my wife and I go and have that, and it's amazing. So if you come to our little town of 50,000 people, go to Nelson's.
I like it. I'm a breakfast food fan, so sign me up. We will do it. Number nine. This is meant to be open-ended. You can answer however you want. How would you describe Bleacher Report's secret sauce? What has allowed them to overperform over the years?
The brand, like, and not the brand in the sense that like, oh, the logo's cool and it's got a vibe. Bleacher Report was the anti-news site at the time where it was very important to be the anti-news site. We were not the white stuffy guys on ESPN with our, doing the Sports Center thing and not letting you talk about us on Twitter and like that type of thing. And like that seems like quaint and hilarious in 2025, but in the 2000s and the 2010s when Finocchio and those guys started that company, like it was citizen journalism, it was the anti-establishment, and they leaned into that. We're doing partnerships with Kith, we're launching NFTs, we got Shaq playing shuffleboard at our bar. Like it fit the time and the moment. We also happened to be like at the epicenter of the NBA sports world for many years because we were in SF and the Warriors were doing great and everything was happening from there, and it gave us coverage we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. I got to meet Shaq in person simply just because that was the convenient place for the NBA to shoot the stuff for the finals with TNT. And that seems silly, but when we've got that coverage and nobody else does, it puts you on the map, right? It shows you that it can be different. And this is where you get BR kicks and you get the league fits and you get House of Highlights, which is like a separate thing from BR. But it was also when Omar got acquired and that came into Bleacher Report, it was like another shot in the arm because we got to kind of have our Instagram moment for Meta, right? Facebook was declining. They bought Instagram. Turned out that was the right thing at the right time. And House of Highlights was bigger on social in the NBA than Bleacher Report was.
Yeah. No.
And so those two things, I think it was just a right, and not to take any credit away from the guys, but they had the right attitude and the right vision for how to deliver that attitude at a time where people were sick of just the big, old stodgy media companies covering sports.
Whether they knew it or not, like we had, recap stories and we had Sports Illustrated deep dive profiles, but no one was really looking at the culture of sports and like the lifestyle around sports. And Bleacher Report kind of, whether intentionally or not, kind of really found that niche and exploded it.
Yeah, and not too different from what Barstool did. We just took a very different approach. We were a tech-forward product type company, and they were more of a culture, video, whatever. But capturing the same wave, just different sides of that wave, right? There was this fan that was just like, I'm the guy who goes to the bar, quite literally, and like I just love this version of sports, and they tapped into that culture of it and got big without even really building a traditional news company, right? They're getting the same treatment that Bleacher Report is getting with these big leagues now, without even bothering to write a ton of long form content or do any of that traditional journalistic stuff. So while a different approach, it was the same wave the Bleacher Report rode, which is like, we're sick of ESPN, we're sick of Sports Illustrated. Give us something that's about the athletes and the people that I'm seeing more and more of on social, whereas before you didn't see who they were, so you didn't care.
Let alone the tech innovation led by incredible engineers like yourself.
Yes. Thank you for doing the promo for me, Neil.
Last one for you here, Brian. Tell me, we skirted around this a little bit, but you mentioned hosting an esports podcast back in the day called the Rally Point, I think. So tell me,
yes.
What did you learn about esports fandom then? Is it the same as you would characterize it now? Like, give us a little bit of insight into what we should think about when it comes to esports fans.
So the funny thing is that podcast had 3 different names, and that is a very good way to describe our life and how esports went. So Rally Point was the Bleacher Report name for the show because that's what everybody who knew nothing about esports thought would be a great name for a show. When that didn't go well, we turned it into Nerf This, which is what happens when you let the gamers who are hosting the show decide what the name would be. And then when we got moved and acquired by Turner and started becoming like the official. So when we first started, we were an editorial podcast, and we were covering esports for Bleacher Report as part of their nascent podcast network. So this is when like Lefko his show was announced, and we were part of that, which was pretty cool. Lefko's an awesome guy and far better at sports than we are. And then we eventually became like still editorial, but in support of what was going on with E-League. So they're doing Counter-Strike, they're doing Street Fighter, Overwatch League stuff, things of that nature. And I think what that demonstrated is everyone saw dollar signs. what you said earlier is very, very true, which is everyone thought this was going to be the next league that you could put the money into the ATM machine and poof, out would become your $1 billion esports. And some people figured it out, but it's because they went away from esports. I often call out 100 Thieves in Cleveland as like a very good esports success story because they leaned into the brand. They understood that winning competitions was not going to be how esports orgs made money. And they leaned a lot into clothing and fashion and that type of thing. And they carved a niche out for them. I think the ones like your Fanatics and some of these other ones that just thought this was going to be a content creation like ATM machine that would just give them tons and tons of money and they'd make millions of dollars from the Overwatch League and NBC would buy rights. And I understand why that sounded exciting. I think it was just a really, really, really long leap from let's make fun of the nerds on Twitch to hundreds of millions of dollar broadcast deals. And that's coming from a nerd on Twitch. Like I've got video game tattoos all over my body. But like we were never going to make that leap. Where is it today? We have a lot of Middle Eastern money propping up esports, and I say that as someone who's not in esports anymore. And it's better than having nothing. But I think if we fall back into the same trap to assume that this is now the new norm and this is how esports is going to survive, we're going to faceplant again. We have to understand that this is a lifeline that we can now use to turn this into a sustainable business. Stop thinking everything can be a bloody esport. Not every dumb mobile game, not every version of sim racing. Like there's going to be 4 or 5 games, just like there's only 4 or 5 sports that can sustain an audience, especially one outside of people who don't participate in the game. And we'll see where it goes. I would not put money on it, and that's not because I think esports will fail. I think the people who are supporting esports generally are making the same mistakes that they made back when Overwatch League got big, League of Legends. Remember when MLB BAM Tech did an exclusive deal to stream Riot esports, and where did that go, Neil? Like those are the type of things I think we just got our eyes got a little bit too big and we believed our own BS, and hopefully we'll not make that same mistake again, even though it does sometimes feel like we are.
Yeah, I mean, it continues to be a fascinating area to watch. I mean, you see those clips from like packed arenas in Korea, and you're like, how is this not going to be $1 billion or whatever? And there's so many challenges still to come, but there's still opportunities out there too. So it'll be interesting to follow.
There is the one, and I'll leave you with this. The one shout out I always give when people talk about esports, it's the most undersung aspect of esports that is doing it right because they're not trying to do esports, and that is the fighting game community. You walk into Evo in Vegas every single year. There are tens of thousands of people there. They fill that entire convention center that they use for UFC fights with esports fans to watch a bunch of people push buttons, and it's the culture because it's so tied to various fashion, anime, rap. Like there's so many aspects of the culture of FGC. It reminds me a lot about the NBA in that there's just so many other reasons people are fans of Street Fighter than just going up. Most of us are really bad at fighting games, right? But like watching people be good at it, and it's because they haven't tried to make big tournaments. They haven't tried to franchise it. They got investment from Sony. They're doing a lot of the right things. That's the direction to go. But it shows that if you just lead into what makes esports good instead of trying to turn it into a business too soon, you can be successful.
Spot on. Oh, I like it. All right, Brian, you kicked ass in your quick taps. We had some great personalized questions for you, obviously. Now it's your chance to take over the podcast. Tell us your social media all-star follow. It doesn't have to be on social. It could be a podcast, it can be a social follow, it can be a newsletter. Just tell us who they are and why they're following.
I have to use this one, even though it's a bit of a cop-out because he's an investor, but Andrew Petcash and the Profluence folks, there are people that are doing it because there's money to be made, and then there's people who are doing it because they just believe there's a huge opportunity for more people to get involved in sports and to turn it into a viable business for all of us. And he's somebody who's doing that. The amount of work that man puts into the insights that he surfaces, and this is somebody who's helping him build tools to make this easier. Like PressBox is also supporting him in his efforts, but like 99% of what you see out there is still just his pure hustle. And he's somebody who's turned it into a real business. We would not have investment without him. There's multiple other companies who've had that opportunity, and it's not because he's like knows all these VCs or has billions of dollars in his pocket. He's done it through grit, and he produces a ton of content. I was inspired very, very early on in my career by Gary Vaynerchuk, and he's got, the jab type of thing. And I think he's awesome at that. He doesn't just come out and tell you why you need to come to his conference, sell you on his Profluence membership. I've actually never even seen him talk about the price. He just puts a ton of content out there, and the community growth he's had shows it. So huge shout out to Pat Cash.
A great shout out. I would encourage people to look him up. And as Brian mentioned, he does a ton of work, and it's awesome stuff. And how about you, Brian? Where can we find you as well as all things PressBox across web, digital, social, wherever you want to send us?
Man, I'm one of those weird people that doesn't do social, Neil. Isn't that crazy? So you can find PressBox at pressbox.studio. We have a really quirky website, so have some fun with it. And then you can find us everywhere, basically on social at PressBox HQ, because was all that it was available. I might be on social somewhere, but follow me on LinkedIn. That's where you're going to see most of my content. B_Hough.
There we go. Check them out. Check out PressBox. Cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast today, sharing some great wisdom, great insight, and we look forward to continuing to follow the PressBox journey, all the work you guys are doing.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Neil.
Thank you so much again to Brian Hough, co-founder and CEO of PressBox. Really enjoyed learning from him. Really enjoyed being able to track what he's doing with his technology, what they're doing at PressBox. It continues to be a source of insight, inspiration, and knowledge for me. It's got me thinking about different ways to create fans with sports, different ways to package content for fans, different ways to leverage and really learn and sort of listening on steroids and creating content off of it. Yes, you can try to do what PressBox does on a manual basis, or you can try to keep an eye out for technology or try their technology as well. Just a lot to think about from this episode. I hope you learned a lot because I sure did. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening. Thanks also again to Brian Hough, of course, of PressBox. As always, I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. Find me on Twitter, NJH287. I am still there. On LinkedIn as well, where you can find me and post more content. Hit me up there. The website, dsmsports.net. You can also contact me through that website as well. And of course, the podcast is available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever podcast platform is your favorite. Until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off from the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.